With testing, there's also this idea of black box and white box testing. And so with this lecture, it's going to be more of a top sort of view of this. This gets very technical really fast whenever you talk about these things, especially with black box testing, because you actually go into sort of mathematical proofs and you have to understand things like state machines and cause effect graphing and basically mathematical nomenclature and stuff like that. And that's where you sort of like with a computer science degree, you might actually understand some of this stuff. Or if you're really into QA, you learn more about this. But I want to just go over a little bit of a top down with maybe some keywords if you want to look up additional things and yeah, just get you exposed to it. So with black box testing, what we have is we have inputs on the left side. So we put in input, it goes into a black box. So it's a function that we don't know how it works. All we know is that it's supposed to do something and then we get an output over here. And with black box, it means, again, that we don't understand the interior of this. And this, a lot of times, is what testers are, is they're going to come in and they don't understand the nitty-gritty of the inside, so they're black box testing. Now, there can be white box testers as well. They're just going to have to spend some time learning the interiors of the code. And that's what we're going to talk about over here is white box testing. But with black box testing, we have an input, we have an output. We put in different input, we get different output. And we're just checking to see. We have this, again, this oracle where we have this input on the left. We have some sort of input and it's supposed to be giving different output on the right side. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to see, does it work? If we combine different things, is it still working? And so we have things like boundary values, and that's where we try to input high and low ranges. And if these pass, it's assumed everything else passes. So if we can input, a billion and 0 into an equation, or a billion and 1, we assume that everything between 1 and a billion probably works as well. Because what function or what equation wouldn't it work with? That's a very weird test case where numbers in between here wouldn't work, but the edges do work. So we do try that sort of boundary test with this, where we try to basically break it by going into corner cases. How large of a number can we input? How small of a number can we input? And does it still work? Cause effect graphing, this is where we test different causes to make sure different effects happen. And this gets, again, very, very complex. You're basically like creating these graphs of cause and effect values, and you're trying to see what the end effect is. So you're trying different causes, which are just the input, and you're trying to see the similar effects. With pairwise testing, it's when we have multiple parameters being tested, and we're trying to check all conditions here. So we have, a form or something, and there's 28 different ways to say yes and no and different values and stuff. And so we're trying to test by putting in those different pairs to see if the output is what we expected the output. And then state-based testing is checking input to check state changes. And state changes is if we know state machines, it's these machines that the program has these different states, and certain points change basically the state of the machine here. So for example, a lot of times these are tested with zeros and ones. So maybe a 0 goes to here, a 1 goes to here, a 0 goes to here, and then maybe there's a loop on 1 here, and so on. And it's just sort of this big control flow here of different states. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to test to make sure that our state machine that we draw is accurate within here. That if we put these inputs and outputs in here, that it's going to get us from state 1 to state 2 to state 3 to state 4 to state 586, or however many states end up being in our program here. So that's the state-based testing. With white box testing, what we have is we have the ability to see inside of it. We know the control flow, we know the variables, we know all the data within it, and we're actually checking that in this testing. And so with Blackbox, we're testing the general use of the program. We're testing that if we use it as normal users, it's going to work. With Whitebox, we're testing a little bit more technical. We're making sure that there's no memory leaks. We're making sure that the variables are used right. We're making sure data flow is correct. And with Whitebox testing, we do two really main things here. That's the idea of control flow testing and then data flow testing. And control flow is we set up test cases which cover all branch conditions and different statements. So if we have this big if-else statement, or even, so like let's say we have, it starts here and then we have an if-else statement, and then this one has if-else statements, and this goes down here, and then it goes like that, it goes over here, and like so. It's kind of hard to test all of this. So what we're trying to do is we're going to create probably an automatic solution that's going to toggle between these and try to test each flow at least once. So it's going to go down and it's going to try to test and make sure that it goes through each flow at least one time so that everything has been touched once. And then we know that the expected output is correct on every single flow. And that's control flow testing. Data flow testing is just going to cover all variables. We're designing test cases to cover the different variable declarations and their uses to make sure that at no point does a variable break or, for example, if we develop in certain type strict languages where, for example, a variable has to be an integer, a lot of times if we don't touch that variable, then an error won't pop up until we touch it and something goes wrong. So for example, at some point, if we're trying to put a string, which again is a computer science term for just like text here. So it's just a string of characters together, a string. If we try to put a string into there, it might blow the whole program up and the whole thing will crash. Well, if we don't test all the variables and make sure that all of the control flows and all the touches of those variables never breaks it, then we don't know about that bug until someone actually does it and it crashes a program and gives them a bad user experience. So that's what we do with data flow testing. Is we know the interiors, we're going to check all those little points of data and make sure that they're all working and being set properly. So that is a black box and white box testing. Again, sort of this was a top-down view of it just so that you can understand some of the terminology. If you're more interested in this, definitely look up some more information online on this stuff. It gets pretty complicated, but it is very interesting.